Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. There is a narrative that has emerged over the last couple weeks, and I think bluntly it's fair. It is that in whatever order you choose, UConn or Purdue, one is one is two. It's UConn, Purdue, Purdue, UConn, and everybody else after that. We talked about the Athletic article the other day where they said there's so much parity in the sport. It's like, no, there's not. There's two teams that are very clearly significantly better than everybody else. And I should mention, by the way, Purdue does play on Thursday night. So if they lose, completely ignore that first part of this segment, but the rest still applies. By the way, even if Purdue loses on Thursday night, which I don't think they will. But at the end of the day, it does feel like it's those two teams and everybody else. I feel like we're weirdly getting to a point where if both those teams don't make a Final Four, it'd be considered a disappointment. Like even Purdue hasn't made a Final Four since 1980. I was on Indiana radio this week and they said, yeah, that's kind of where we're at. So it's UConn and Purdue, enough fluff. Let's get to the topic of conversation. Topic of conversation is we all agree those are the two best teams. So the question becomes now, who is number three? And it's been an evolving question over the last couple weeks. I think different times of the year, you could argue different things. At one point, I know that I argued that I thought Kentucky was as good as pretty much anybody not named UConn and Purdue. Fast, athletic, shooting, this, that. They have obviously hit the skids. I'm still curious to see if we ever get them at full strength, what they can look like consistently, the Wildcats. Beyond that, we made the argument for North Carolina. I really like North Carolina. I was high on North Carolina early, but they too are struggling, most recently losing at Syracuse. Houston's really good. The metrics love Houston. I have some more concerns. They've already lost to the two best teams in the conference on the road, at Kansas, at Iowa State. Also took another loss at TCU. So you kind of go through different teams. You know, Tennessee, every time I'm fully ready to jump 2 feet in on Tennessee, they do something weird. Like losing at Texas A&M the other day, getting blown out at Texas A&M, really. So I just bring it up to say it's a weird year. We know Purdue and UConn are number 1 and 2 in some order. So the question is who's number 3? And I think I finally have an answer. It was a team that I believed in early, then I kind of gave up on. It is the Arizona Wildcats, who I truly believe in my heart of hearts. They're the third best team in the sport, and I'll be honest, I think they are the best suited to beat either of those two teams. And I think you could argue they're the best suited, period, to beat UConn in all of college basketball. Now, with Arizona, it's been a very interesting year. Because remember, the first week of the season, they go to Duke. They fly across country, play Duke, and take care of business against the Blue Devils. And so at that point, you're like, oh, this team's good. And at that point, they were the best team that I had seen. And you kind of ride that wave all part of the early season. They take care of Wisconsin at home. They beat Michigan State on Thanksgiving Day. A couple other good wins. But then they really kind of hit the skids starting in mid-December with a loss to Purdue in Indianapolis. Now, at the time, Purdue was number 1 in the country. Nothing wrong with that. Nobody's going to criticize them. But there was a stretch from December 16th or I think it was December 15th, to January 25th, where they lost 5 of 6 games outside of the state of Arizona. So they lost to Purdue. They lost to Florida Atlantic in Vegas. They beat Cal on the road. They lost to Stanford on the road. They lose to Washington State, and then they lose to Oregon State. And so it was at that time that I said, man, I got to sell all my Arizona stock. They stink. They can't win outside the state of Arizona. Well, quietly since then, starting with a win over Oregon after that loss to Oregon State. Since then, since that win over Oregon, Arizona has ripped off 5 straight wins, including what you could argue are the 2 best teams in that conference on the road, winning at Oregon and then winning at Colorado last week. And to me, it was the Colorado game that I just sat there and said, you know what? I gave up on this team too soon because it was a weird game. The way the Pac-12 schedules work, you play back-to-back road games, and the schedule breaks where you're always playing Utah and Colorado in back-to-back games, one or the other. They're both in the mountains. It is deemed to be a very hard road trip because of altitude. Well, Arizona beats Utah in triple overtime, And you think last week against Colorado, oh, they're going to take a step back. Oh, they're going to struggle. Colorado's an NCAA tournament team. They have a lottery pick on their team and a kid named Cody Williams. They're going to struggle. Arizona absolutely blew them out. And that was where I said, listen, the college basketball season is ebbs and flows, peaks and valleys. And I truly believe in my heart of hearts that I gave up on Arizona too soon. So why is that? And why do I believe that they are potentially the third best team? And I believe still very much a national title contender. The first part, one, I think you can go back and look at that 5 losses in 6 game streak and say that in hindsight, maybe it isn't quite as bad as we thought. Okay, first loss to Purdue. Purdue's awesome. Like, I've been critical of Purdue, but they're still a really good team. The game was in Indianapolis. You lose to Florida Atlantic, which is a consistent top 25 team in double overtime, okay? You lose to Stanford. That's a bad loss. We'll talk about that in a minute. Then you lose at Washington State. You lose at Oregon State on a buzzer beater. And so at the time, it felt like the sky is falling. This is a total disaster. Everything's going wrong. But now you look at it in hindsight, and it's interesting. Purdue's maybe the number 1 team in the country, at worst number 2. Florida Atlantic's a top 25 team. You lost in double overtime. Stanford was bad, as I said. Washington State, all of a sudden now, is an NCAA tournament team. And you lose to Oregon State at the buzzer. So essentially, when you're talking about 5 losses, you're talking about 3 to NCAA tournament teams, a 4th at the buzzer, 1 in double overtime. That's not really that bad when you consider that of those 5 games, 3 of them were in true road sites, and the 4th one was basically a true road game against Purdue. So I think even when they were struggling, it was a little bit overrated, but they've won 5 of 6, and this is part of why I like them. First of all, the resume now, they're trending towards the number 1 seed. Remember, whatever happened in the middle of the year, this is who they have beaten. Duke, who at Duke. By the way, Duke right now is tied at the top of the ACC standings. On top of that, they also beat Wisconsin, tied for 3rd in the Big Ten. They beat Alabama, who is leading the SEC. So they beat the best teams in all of these other conferences. And when you look at who they have as personnel, I do think they are best built to beat all these other teams. For people who don't know Arizona well, what I would say is this. They play 8 guys, and I'll be blunt, I think 6 of them, maybe even 7, have a chance to be NBA players, okay? So again, I know a lot of you aren't diehard Arizona fans. If you don't know the personnel, here's what you need to know. Starting point guard, Kylan Boswell, I believe one day will play in the NBA, probably not after this season. He's been struggling. I get it. Caleb Love, we can criticize him, we can critique him, we can whatever. Dude can get 25, 30 on any given night. I think he's going to play in the NBA someday. Backup guard, Jaden Bradley, is a former McDonald's All-American, began his career at Alabama. Probably won't be this year, but I think he could play in the NBA. KJ Lewis, a 4-star wing, will definitely play in the NBA. Won't be after this year, but probably next year. Then you have a wing named Pella Larson, who, oh, by the way, is now showing up on mock draft boards as a 2nd-round pick. Keyshawn Johnson is a 2nd-round pick probably this year. And then the young big man Krevis is probably going to be an NBA player down the road. So you're talking about 7 players overall, or eight players that you play. 7 of them will probably play in the NBA. And so first of all, why do I like Arizona? It's because at the end of the day, this is what I always say. You can look at all the different things that lead to success in March. You know what history tells us? The number 1 precursor of NCAA tournament success, of winning national championships. Do you have dudes that are going to play in the NBA? By the way, this is why I still worry about Purdue. Purdue has 1 NBA player, maybe if you believe Zach Edey is an NBA player. And I know he's moving up mock draft boards. He'll get drafted somewhere. But outside of him, I don't think they have an NBA player on their roster. And history tells us those are not the types of teams that win the national championship. UConn last year had 3 dudes currently on NBA rosters. Dama Sanogo, Chicago Bulls, Jordan Hawkins, New Orleans Hornets, and Andre Jackson, the Milwaukee Bucks. Klingon, Caravan, who were on the team last year, will play in the NBA. So you're talking minimum 5 NBA players on last year's UConn team. Even when you go back to Virginia, the year they won the title, 3 guys that played in the NBA the following year. Villanova, remember, they won the title. They had 4 guys drafted the next year. So you go on and on down the list. You need NBA players. I believe Arizona, between the 2024 and 2025 and maybe 2026 drafts, have a minimum of 5 to 6 NBA players. 2, I think it's also worth noting, like, they're battle tested too. I really should say what I really actually like about those 8 that I said They know who their 8 are. Like, this is an important thing. Like, I watch college basketball every night, especially this time of year. You watch college basketball, it's amazing how many teams still don't really know what their rotations are, who their guys are, who they can trust, who they can't. Listen, I've been mostly a Calipari defender maybe until this week, and I know there's been a lot of injuries, but it's mid-February. He still does not know what his rotation looks like. He still has fans on social media arguing over who should be starting and who shouldn't, and who should be playing and who shouldn't. And so Arizona has 8 guys that they know they can count on, a bunch of NBA talent. They're clearly battle tested, even if the league isn't good. But I also like them for a few different reasons. They can play a bunch of different ways. They have 2 legitimate 7-footers in Krivas and Ballo, who can both play, eat up minutes, whatever. They have a big wing in Keyshawn Johnson, who I believe is going to play in the NBA. But if they need to go small, they can play him at the 5. Pelle Larsson, an NBA player, you can play at the 4. You can play 3 or 4 guards. You can play 2 7-footers. You can do whatever you need to do to win. And so this is why I like Arizona so much. I don't think they're amazing. I don't think they're unbeatable. But when you have that kind of lineup versatility, NBA talent, and the last part, by the way, and again, being battle tested, and the last part, they do have Caleb Love. And we can make fun of him and people don't like him and this and that. The other thing, this is a dude that there isn't a player in college basketball that has more big game NCAA tournament experience than Caleb Love, with the ball in his hands, making big plays. Did it against UNC in the Final Four. Did it with UNC in the Final Four against Duke to get them to a national championship game. Knocked out UCLA in the NCAA tournament 2 years ago. And so even UConn, even Purdue, UConn's got dudes, maybe Tristan Newton, but he's not at that level of experience as Caleb Love. And so I could go on and on. I don't think Arizona's perfect. Do think they need to tighten up some things. They need to get better, more consistent production from their point guard, Kylan Boswell. But I think this is the most interesting question in college basketball right now. We know who's number 1. We know who's number 2. Who is number 3? And to me, it's the Arizona Wildcats.